B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Monday, October 2nd, 2017. Like many Americans, I woke up this morning to the sordid news from Las Vegas, where a lone gunman conducted a 10-minute shooting spree from his high-rise hotel room, leaving at least 58 people dead and more than 500 wounded. And that news broke really, it happened on the same day that I read the news in my local Sunday paper, the San Francisco Chronicle, that Republicans in Washington are ready to introduce new legislation to roll back certain gun regulations. We'll get to that in a moment. But the carnage in Las Vegas is tragic and real. And it is a broken record here in the United States, as this kind of gun violence numbs us. And I would argue that our condition of perpetual war leaves us pretty much immune, or at least our emotional responses are muted to the kind of real violence that we see. And part of that is because of the media entertainment complex that serves up graphic violence as entertainment on a nightly basis on your TV screen and on a weekly or monthly basis on the big screen at the movie theater. We are a violent nation. And while I support reasonable gun control laws, I recognize that we have millions of weapons in circulation and that regulation can only put a certain limit. It could not end the violence and the death that occurs. And so, in a story that will play out on your TV screen for the next few days, we've learned that 64-year-old Stephen Paddock, who lived in Mesquite, Nevada, had no significant prior criminal history. His dad apparently did. And Stephen Paddock was described as a multimillionaire. So he didn't do this because he was out of money. He's also described as a high-stakes gambler who was familiar to some of the casino crews in Las Vegas. So it's unclear at this point what his motivation was and why he chose a country music festival that had 20,000 people in an area that he could target from his 32nd floor hotel room at the Mandalay Bay Luxury Casino Hotel. Then we have Trump, who described this as an act of pure evil, ordered flags at half-staff, said he'll travel to Las Vegas on Wednesday, and he has no credibility whatsoever in trying to unite Americans at a time of tragedy. He has no credibility because he spends most of his time dividing Americans and undermining some of his own appointees. It's really ridiculous and tragic because of the consequences. But as I pointed out, Trump is a guy who spent the weekend dividing us, and we'll get into the details of that in a moment. But the pro-gun legislation caught me by surprise. This is on the front page of the Chronicle, my San Francisco hometown paper, yesterday morning. And these measures had been put on hold after the shooting of Steve Scalise, the top Republican House member who was a victim of this shooter at the congressional baseball practice just a few months ago. And it was interesting because last night 60 Minutes had a fairly predictable report on Steve Scalise, his heroism, his fight to recover. And he certainly has suffered. I wish Steve Scalise personally no ill will. But the interview didn't bother to mention that his weeks in intensive care, I think he had multiple surgeries, as many as 5. Well, they were covered by insurance that Steve Scalise has voted to deny to many Americans. And there was no reference because it would be impolite and would cut into the heroic arc of the story that 60 Minutes was delivering to trouble us with Steve Scalise's votes on gun regulation issues in the past. And so what we learn is that now that people thought that issues of gun violence were kind of in the background, the House was going to pounce on this and propose a series of bills. One of them, which would legalize silencers, is called the Sportsman Heritage and Recreational Enhancement Act. Now, you know sportsmen need silencers out there, right? When you're hunting deer or moose or crocodile or rabbit, whatever it is you decide to go hunting for. And one proponent, Doug LaMalfa, who is a conservative Republican from here in California, said, you know, this isn't a silencer we're talking about because it still makes a sound. But what it does is it cuts the percentage of the noise down to make shooting sports a little nicer for people's hearing. And there's no mention that a silencer could be used to muffle a gunshot in a criminal act. And the way these people spin up these items on the wish list from the National Rifle Association is really insulting. And you've got Mike Thompson. He's a California Democrat, member of the House. He's a blue dog, conservative. He describes himself as an avid hunter. He opposes the bill because it puts both law enforcement and the public at risk. And not only do they want to legalize silencers, they want to pass legislation that would preempt state laws that ban somebody who comes from an open carry state into a more restrictive state from either open carrying or concealed carrying a weapon. And California has very tight restrictions on concealed carry. Missouri, I know for a fact, does not. So somebody from the show me state could come to California and decide to show me their gun, and local law would be eviscerated by a federal preemption. There is also an element to reauthorize the sale of armor-piercing bullets. And these are what are called cop killer bullets. But they'll only be sold as long as the manufacturer claims that the ammunition is made for sporting purposes. Are they suggesting that killing a cop who's wearing a bulletproof vest and these armor-piercing bullets might still kill that officer? That is some kind of sporting purpose? And what about just regular people? Do they need to be exposed to the mayhem caused by these really dangerous projectiles? And Nancy Pelosi said the Republicans are advertising the bills under a facade of it's for hunting. And she asked, hunters need armor-piercing bullets? They need silencers? They need to conceal and carry in order to hunt? Now, I expect that the Republicans will understand that this isn't the right climate to promote this legislation, and they'll ram it through by attaching it to some other bills, maybe during the Christmas holidays when nobody's paying attention. And as I mentioned, Trump, the dear tweeter of America these days, he has been working on dividing Americans. And his effort over the weekend, moving on from the NFL, although he did issue an edict that all players must stand on Sunday and every other time the national anthem plays. And that protest is kind of fizzling out. The way the NFL massaged it and had all kinds of people take a knee but not during the anthem and then stand in linked arms. I mean, it has lost whatever meaning it had, and that is an effective tactic on the part of the NFL, and it supports Trump's objective. But the way Trump zeroed in on the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, Carmen Yulin Cruz, who sent out a Mayday signal. She basically said, if anybody can hear me, people are dying in Puerto Rico. And she rejected the claim from Trump's top people at FEMA that this is a good news story, that everything's going well in Puerto Rico and, the relief efforts are underway. But the facts on the ground are very different, and Trump tries to spin up his own reality. One of his tweets was, "We've done a great job with the almost impossible situation in Puerto Rico. Outside of the fake news or politically motivated ingrates, people are now starting to recognize the amazing work." And he had attacked Mayor Cruz directly. Such poor leadership ability by the mayor of San Juan and others in Puerto Rico who are not able to get their workers to help. They want everything to be done for them when it should be a community effort. 10,000 federal workers now on island doing a fantastic job. Later in the day, I believe he issued 18 tweets, most about Puerto Rico, in an 11-hour period on Saturday. This guy has nothing better to do and is so obsessed with distracting and enraging his base, these idiots who follow him on Twitter. Later in the day, he said, despite the fake news media in conjunction with the Dems, an amazing job is being done in Puerto Rico. Great people. And many noticed the racist tinge to essentially saying Puerto Ricans are lazy and they want it all done for them. Well, BuzzFeed, which is an interesting media platform and can be very annoying, published an update about what's really happening in Puerto Rico, and they resisted the temptation to turn it into a listicle. I don't know if you spent any time at BuzzFeed or Huffington Post, but there is decent news reporting at those sites. It is buried under, 10 ways to lose weight, 11 reasons the Kardashians are cool. I mean, it is so annoying. But that said, BuzzFeed has a reporter in San Juan, Nidhi Prakash, I guess it is, and notes that the president spent the day attacking his critics, but only 5% of people on the island of Puerto Rico have power. Most of them don't have internet capabilities, even with smartphones, and they couldn't see his messages anyway. And, that's one of the things that Trump really is oblivious to. Much of the time, when he attacks, for example, the fake news media, he is drawing attention to coverage that most people don't have any idea of. Only a few million people watch CNN throughout the week. Most people don't. And when Trump tweets attacks on them, he is drawing attention to their coverage and actually promoting them for many people. So BuzzFeed says 45% of the people on the island have drinkable water. That means more than half don't. 11,000 people are in shelters. 10% have cell phone service. About half of the supermarkets are open, but stocking is spotty. One hospital is fully running while 59 are limping along. And I'd like to suggest that they send all the Stingray units that are used to spy in a dragnet manner on people as they claim to be looking for a suspect by tracking his or her cell phone. These are fake cell phone towers, and they work for a radius of about 5 miles. You deploy, a few hundred Stingrays, you could cover much of the island of Puerto Rico, and it would be the best use for those devices that I can think of. But the biggest issue on the island is that there is no electricity. Handful of people have generators at home, but they're running out of diesel for the commercial generators and those at hospitals. And the effort so far does appear to be to use helicopters to get some relief supplies into the cut-off communities. But I haven't heard anything about a massive hurry-up effort to restore the electrical grid on the island of Puerto Rico. The other thing that Trump did that was so risky and reckless on Twitter over the weekend followed a story on Saturday that Rexon Tillerson, the Secretary of State, who appears to be ready to quit because of the way Trump keeps interfering, he announced while he was in Beijing that he is working 2 or 3 different channels to develop dialogue with Pyongyang, North Korea. That is the best thing that Rexon Tillerson could be doing these days. But his boss, in some misguided effort to play good cop, bad cop, or just because he is an idiot, he put out a tweet on Sunday Quote, I told Rex Tillerson, our wonderful Secretary of State, that he is wasting his time trying to negotiate with Little Rocket Man. Save your energy, Rex. We'll do what has to be done. Now, this is Trump shooting himself in the face, not the foot. Because his idea that this is just a negotiation, with a few nuclear weapons, on the table, is ludicrous. And after trying to renege on the nuclear deal with Iran, now he's undercutting Tillerson, and he expects Kim Jong-un to come to the table at some point? The United States is proving that it cannot be trusted. It is not a reliable party. And we've got a crazy man who could tweet us into war at any moment. And he appears oblivious to the risks that he is putting us all in a position to deal with. Oh, and he bragged over the weekend, Clinton failed, Bush failed, Obama failed, I won't fail. Well, that's a lot of bluster. And it's a lot of bullshit. And he knows it. Maybe he's trying to play the crazy mofo, and he thinks that somehow is going to cause a change of heart by Kim Jong-un. I'm sorry. It's just it's really, you can tell words are failing me, so I'll move on to the next story. Tom Price exited the administration on Friday. He was the high-flying corporate jet chartering Health and Human Services Secretary. He had been hired by Trump to dismantle Obamacare, but now that that's not working, the private jet flap gave Trump an excuse to accept the resignation of Tom Price. But according to the New York Times, Trump berated Price in the Oval Office on Friday for about 2 hours before he accepted Price's resignation. Didn't waterboard him, apparently, but came close. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And over the weekend, I got a fresh wave of checks at the post office box. Michelle Pasco in Sacramento, Frank Brown, who lives in San Francisco, and one time he and I had a chance encounter at a supermarket check stand here in Marin County. Frank, thanks for renewing your subscription. Nice to hear from you. And Joe Davis, who passes on the web for Quaker Orts. That's his handle. Quaker Orts. Joe Davis just renewed his annual subscription with a little extra bump, and I appreciate each and every one of you. And that's my way of soft selling into urging you, the listener who has cash in your wallet and doesn't have a subscription to the Peter B. Collins Podcast. Come on over. peterbcollins.com, click menu, click Become a Subscriber. Takes you to the sign-up page. We've got bonus books depicted there. And in just a couple of minutes, you can be all set up. Well, as you know, I have traveled to Spain a couple of times. I love the city of Barcelona. And I am a softie when it comes to aspirations of communities for independence. And maybe it's my sense of American history that we broke away from England and declared our independence in a very flashy Declaration of Independence. And so when we see the vote for Catalan independence impeded by the central government in Madrid, who sent goon squads in riot gear to disrupt the election. They confiscated ballots and broke up polling places. They busted some heads with nightsticks. They manhandled voters in a very graphic way, and the videos have been circling around on the web. And it is fair to say that their goal of secession violates the Constitution of the nation of Spain, and the nation's constitutional court suspended the referendum. The Madrid government says it's illegal. But I believe that you cannot suppress desires for independence. And it's much better to work in the direction of their pain. But that's not being heeded. My advice is not being taken. We understand that about 2 million votes were cast out of a possible 5.3 million. So that will give the central government in Madrid the basis to say, well, you may have gotten a 90% approval from the people who did vote, but it doesn't represent a majority of the Catalan population. So this is going to go on for a long time, and the leaders of Catalonia are, I think, very determined. And I've linked in the show file for today's podcast to a commentary, an op-ed published at The Guardian today by Paul Mason. I don't know Paul Mason's credentials, but he wrote, though brutal, the Guardia Civil, that's the civil guard, actions on Sunday were calculated. In the selection of riot squads from outside areas where casual hatred of Catalans is rife, in the targeting of old people and women, in the pinpoint nature of the interventions, which people on the barricades thought were concentrated on middle-class areas. So 2 million people did vote, 90% said yes, but the total potential electorate was 5.3 million, and so I think that struggle will go on. Just a little sidebar, Saturday afternoon we spent time with friends. They are Spanish people who are living in the United States for a few years. Lovely couple, Eduardo and Miriam, and their 2 kids. And, we talked a little bit about politics. They asked us to try to explain Trump, and there's not much you can say. And we asked them to explain the Catalan independence movement. They are hardliners from Madrid, and they believe that, number one, Barcelona isn't really part of Spain, but they shouldn't be allowed to secede from Spain. And so there are many contradictions that are kind of built in to the long-running struggle between the central government and the people of Barcelona and the surrounding region. And I don't think this is going to be resolved in any short order. But according to the New York Times, the leaders, including Carles Puigdemont, the Catalan leader, said late last night that they had won the right to have their own state, and he would soon present the result to the regional parliament to make it binding. They've also called on the European Union to stop looking the other way and to recognize the aspirations of the people of Catalonia. But so far, Brussels is backing Madrid and saying, no, you cannot move toward independence. So what remains to be seen is if the Madrid government, which apparently is possible under law, would take full administrative control of Catalonia and essentially try to occupy it and lock it down. And that would be, I think, the absolute worst move they could make. But I wouldn't put it out of line. My sense of the Madrid government is that they are ruthless and hardline, and that they are going to show that this is not something that will be tolerated. And I don't know if you see it, but in the corporate media in this country, there is a kind of paternalistic or condescending tone to coverage of the vote in Catalonia and last week's independence referendum in Kurdistan, in the northern part of Iraq, in Erbil. The headline here, the New York Times, Kurds vote for independence only adds to their obstacles. And the tone of all this is to back the current leaders of the world and the U.S. position, which is hardly based on the fundamentals that we preach to the rest of the world. Land of the free, home of the brave. I'm happy to see that 4 members of the House of Representatives, including a freshman from California, Democrat Ro Khanna, have introduced what's called a privileged resolution that requires a floor vote within 15 days. It is a vote to invoke the War Powers Act to terminate U.S. involvement in the war in Yemen. I fully support this. We have been operating outside of the constitutional role of Congress defining war powers, and the U.S., which treated Yemen as a shooting gallery during the Obama administration, has taken a more subordinate role in the last couple of years, providing support for the Saudis' brutal assault on Yemen, including targeting information. We resupply them on a regular basis, and we support their propaganda. So H. Con Res 81 is privileged under the War Powers Act of 1973, meaning it's guaranteed a vote and doesn't have to have the blessing of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Rules Committee, or leadership, who would normally block these votes before they get to the floor. It will sit with the Foreign Affairs Committee for 15 calendar days and then is expected to come up for a vote the week of next week, the week of October 9th. And on Friday, after a long-running struggle and a compromise at the Human Rights Council of the United Nations meeting in Geneva, the Saudis basically won by preventing what will follow from being called an investigation. But what has been decided is that an international team of experts will examine abuses in the Yemen war and seek to identify those responsible. As you can tell, that is deeply watered down, but it is better than nothing, and it shows how powerful Saudi Arabia is these days. Well, we have two stories based on leaks, one from the Washington Post and the one in front of me here from the New York Times. The Times headline reads, Facebook's Russia-linked ads came in many disguises. Now, the article discloses that they have not actually taken possession of copies of these ads or even seen them. They have been described by leakers, presumably on Capitol Hill, at the congressional committees that have received the material from Facebook and started to review it. And I note the use of the term believe. Nothing is proven in this article. It's a lot of assertions, and it takes some faith. Like this, federal investigators and officials at Facebook now believe these groups and their pages were part of a highly coordinated disinformation campaign linked to the Internet Research Agency, a secretive company in St. Petersburg, Russia, known for spreading Kremlin-linked propaganda and fake news across the web. They were described to the New York Times by two people familiar with the social network and its ads who were not authorized to discuss them publicly. Leaks. These are more leaks. These are calculated leaks. And they have examples of these Facebook ads. One is attempting to divide people around gun rights and the Second Amendment. Another is a pro-gay rights page, I guess, that would be sent to people who don't support gay rights. And they build this up, and magnify it, exaggerate it. And I am still left nonplussed, because they say that tens of millions of people were served these ads. But most of them did not portray support or opposition to Trump or Clinton. Many of them were just taking advantage of issues that anybody could find on Facebook any day of the week. And in one laughable case, they publish an ad where the article A is omitted in a certain phrase. Now, on Facebook and Twitter, on the web, there are a lot of times where we compress things because you don't have room for an extra character or two. But the New York Times deduces that that's a bad Russian attempt to speak English. Now, maybe it's true, but they offer no proof. It is just uninformed speculation. And so this just leaves me shaking my head once again at the decline of American journalism at mainstream media outlets. And then let's go to the Post, the Bezos Post. Their headline reads, Russian Facebook ad showed a black woman firing a rifle amid efforts to stoke racial strife. One of the Russian-bought advertisements that Facebook shared with congressional investigators Monday featured photographs of an armed black woman dry-firing a rifle. They use the same verb here. Investigators believe the advertisement may have been designed to encourage Look at the weasel words here. I'll read it again. Investigators believe the advertisement may have been designed to encourage African-American militancy and at the same time to stoke fears within white communities, the people said, speaking on condition of anonymity to discuss the probe. That makes this another leak. Now, we're not being leaked everything. We're being leaked some cherry-picked items here. There are 3,000 of these ads that were allegedly spread across 470 pages. And the claim that tens of millions of people saw them is still something I'd like to see some proof of. But this is just the latest effort using leaked, anonymous sources to stoke the hysteria about the Trump-Russia narrative. Brace yourselves. AIPAC is having a big lobbying week in Washington starting October 17th. They are trying to pressure Congress to pass the Israel Anti-Boycott Act, which is labeled S-720. And as you know, I'm bitterly opposed to that. You cannot deny me the right to use my First Amendment power and my economic power as a form of speech to decline to do business with companies that support the state of Israel, boycott, divestment, and sanction. It is my right. And, of course, Americans can boycott all kinds of things every day of the week, but not Israel, because Democratic Senator Ben Cardin, who introduced this bill in March, is determined to pass it. Now, he claims that he is addressing the concerns raised by the ACLU, that this is a draconian law that would subject a violator to a minimum civil penalty of $250,000, a maximum criminal penalty of $1 million, and 20 years in prison. This is extremely extreme. The only senator who has withdrawn her support is New York Democrat Kirsten Gillibrand. I believe 13 other Democrats still support this bill. And Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, not my favorite guy in the Senate, a reliable supporter of Israel, says he doesn't support the bill. And here's a place where I agree with this. Here's a quote. I don't think any American, for example, should be threatened with fines or imprisonment for expressing their views in the form of participating in economic actions with respect to Israel. I certainly don't support that bill, certainly in its current form. Well, watch it carefully. When AIPAC puts on the pressure and opens the spigots of campaign cash, members of Congress heal. And finally today, television game show icon Monty Hall has made his final deal. And I hope it got him what he wanted in the afterlife, if there is one. He passed away in Beverly Hills over the weekend at the age of 96. He had hosted the program called Let's Make a Deal. It started back in 1963. And as a kid, I watched that show. I got a big kick out of it. I loved the way Monty Hall worked over his contestants, and there was always a dumb prize behind door number 2 or door number 3. I think Carol Merrill was the model who, opened the doors and stood there in a Vanna White kind of role. And I've learned that in his later years, Monty Hall became a fundraiser and apparently raised hundreds of millions of dollars for very good causes. I had no idea about that, and I'll bet he was wheeling and dealing with fat cats to get their cash right until the very end. Thanks for listening to my news and comment podcast here today. It's free every day, and when I do the right clicks, it shows up on YouTube every day. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling